Hello and welcome to the ROKER RAPPORT podcast in association with Sunderland Community Soup Kitchen. My name's Rich Speight and I'm joined to look at Sunderland's 1-0 home victory against Portsmouth in the league by Nick Barnes, the Sunderland commentator for BBC Radio Newcastle. How are you this afternoon, Nick?
Very good, all good. Always the better when you've had a win on the Saturday, which sort of the whole complexion of the weekend changes.
Totally, puts everyone in a good mood. Yeah. I think everyone enjoyed themselves, certainly after the match. But the match itself was a bit of a slugfest, really. It wasn't the most attractive spectacle on the eye. Sunderland obviously brought into the side Danny Batth for a debut in central defence and played three at the back. With Tom Flanagan retaining his place. But other than that, there wasn't too much change. Evans came back in as well after injury, and Pritchard looks like he's going to be out for a couple of weeks. What did you make of the lineup? Was it pretty much as you'd expected, Nick?
Yeah, I think so. We had the discussion on Friday before the game, Gary Bennett, myself, Simon Pride in the Total Sport studio, about what would be the likely lineup, and the only sort of real debate was it going to be a back four or three? I think there was a feeling that Tom Flanagan might have been taken out, and I think if Bailey Wright had been fit, that may have been the case, although Lee Johnson did say afterwards he had a couple of sleepless nights as to whether he was going to go with a 4 or 3, and I suspect part of that was because he just didn't know whether Bailey Wright was going to be fit. I think if he was fit, it would have been quite a dilemma whether to go with the 4 with Wright, Bart, Doyle and Sirkin, because I think there's been a feeling that Tom Flanagan probably needs a rest, and there was a couple of moments in the game against Portsmouth where, like against Accrington, he's chasing back and allowed Portsmouth yesterday to get on the ball, and it could have been another of those sort of Accrington scenarios. But ultimately, with Wright being unavailable, I guess it picked itself. I mean, it was always going to be Bart's debut, and then without Wright, it looked like it was going to be a 3. So not a real surprise in the end. I think it's something he's toyed with during the season anyway. And in fairness, I mean, Bart had a very, very good debut, and Doyle actually thought, to his credit, had a good game as well. So, ultimately they did the job. They kept a clean sheet. So, yeah, it worked. I mean, I still think there's a possible issue with Flanagan, but, not because he's a bad player. I just think it's come to that point in the season where he just probably needs a breather.
Certainly, he has played a lot of minutes. He's been almost never present, hasn't he, this season?
Yeah.
So, and his form's been a little bit up and down, because at the beginning of the season he looked like a completely new player, and maybe you're right, maybe he does just need a bit of a rest. But one thing that can't help with the kind of fatigue is the pitch. And I think that played a significant part, especially in the first kind of 25, 30 minutes, where it seemed to me, looking from afar, that Portsmouth seemed to cope with the sticky pitch a little bit better than we did. Where the ball ran away from us and we got caught underneath our feet, they were able to pass it pretty crisply. Do you know what's going on with that, with your inside knowledge?
I mean, I asked Lee Johnson about it afterwards. Again, I mean, the irony was, I said it probably looked like it could have done with a bit of water, because it, as you say, it was sticky. It was rutted, if you like. It wasn't great. I mean, Danny Cowley mentioned it afterwards as well and said that he felt Portsmouth, as you say, probably coped with it early on better than Sunderland did, and Sunderland clearly couldn't come to terms with it early on. I think they've got an issue with it. I don't think. I mean, I know Lee Johnson won't point the finger at anybody particularly. I don't think he wants to throw anybody under the bus for the condition of the pitch. But he at the same time concedes it's a problem, and it's not really going to get any better. I think he did say yesterday, hopefully in the next few weeks, with the sort of warmer temperatures, a bit more sunlight, a bit more air, it might recover. The grass might start to return and grow, but it's in a way it sounds a bit like clutching at straws. To me it's going to be I think another month at least of these sort of conditions, and it's not great. And there's no question. You talk to anybody who's close up to the pitch at the game, those that played on it. I spoke to Elliot Embleton afterwards. It's not great. It's not great for the players, and it's certainly not conducive for the style of football that Lee Johnson and Sunderland want to play. I mean, I'll give them their due against Portsmouth. They weathered it. They got through that first half hour without conceding a goal by hook or by crook. And I think they were probably marginally the better side in the second half, with the unexpected sort of flurry from Portsmouth close to the end where they're trying to get back in the game with an equaliser. But I think, that is all credit to Sunderland, that they sort of stuck in. And it was frustrating and it wasn't great to watch. And I like your use of the word slugfest. I mean, it did feel a bit like that. It was a slog. But I think, commendably, they came through it. They kept a clean sheet. And ultimately, it's the most important thing. It's 3 points. And looking at that league table now, it's quite interesting how Sunderland have gone back second. And even with the games in hand that Wigan have got, I've got no problem with Wigan in a sense being top of the table. Because if Rotherham are looking a little bit more vulnerable now, then maybe it could become a 2-horse race between Sunderland and Rotherham and not Sunderland and Wigan. So because I think hitherto we've all felt that Rotherham would be the team that would run away with it at the top, and I'm not so sure that's going to be the case now.
No, and certainly, I mean, we are improving our squad as well. Obviously, we've got players out to come back, McGeady, O'Nien, and obviously Pritchard and Wright as well. Big players to come back in, and Niall Huggins. I think all of those were mentioned by Lee Johnson in his post-match comments, and all of that's going to add to our ability to get results. But yesterday, in the first half, one of the key moments I think was Lyndon Gooch clearing almost off the line, because if that one in the first half had gone in, it would have been a very different game when they were on top. And Gooch had a very typical Lyndon Gooch game, I thought. He worked really hard, he carried the ball really well, and I thought he was one of the better players on the pitch.
He's I use the word, I mean, maybe it's the wrong word, but Marmite. He does seem to frustrate a lot of fans, at the same time acknowledging that he's got undoubted talent. But I think that the key with Lyndon Gooch has always been the end product. For all that talent, and we know he can take players on, and he's done a good job at playing as a right wing back. He does push forward, he does cause problems for teams, but then it's that final pass, that final decision in the penalty area which seems to let Gooch down. I mean, you mentioned that moment clearing off the line. The other, I suppose, key moment in the first half was when Diaku got into the Portsmouth penalty area and took the wrong decision. Rather than squaring it for Stewart, he decided to try and the more ambitious curling it round the keeper into the corner from an acute angle, when Stewart is there 6 yards out ready to just tap it in, and that would have been a much earlier goal, and it might have settled things a bit earlier, and they may have got a second before half time. Look, we're talking all about this in the cold light of day when we know they've won the game 1-0, but I think you're right about Gooch. He's a player that he does frustrate, but I mean, Lee Johnson speaks very highly about him, clearly likes him in the team for what he can bring, that dynamic he can bring, I guess, in taking the ball from one penalty area to the other. And as I say, he did do a pretty solid job at right fullback as well when called upon.
Yeah, I mean, defensively, I think is where he's really improved in particular this season, and he helps with the press. He's got that energy, and it was Sunderland's press that kind of turned the game in our direction, wasn't it? After like 25, 30 minutes, where it
was that pressure. Suddenly, when you start pushing, putting Hayden Carter under pressure every time he was on the ball, and all credit to Diaku for that, because get Carter. I guess when Carter came off the pitch, he was probably relieved to get off and not see Diaku, because Diaku was like a terrier. Every time Carter got the ball outside the penalty area, Diaku closed him down and forced him into mistakes, and forced him into a mistake that led to the goal. So, I mean, Benno was making the point during the game that they needed to, as soon as he saw them press, as soon as he saw them putting pressure on Portsmouth defence, then they were making inroads. In that first 25 minutes, half an hour, they weren't. They were sitting off them and not putting the pressure on Portsmouth and allowing them to grow in confidence. And, thankfully, the Achilles heel that Portsmouth have got at the moment is their failure to score, which Danny Cowley spoke about afterwards again. They tried to change it with Curtis coming in place of Hurst. And bizarrely, I thought when Hurst came on, he looked the more likely actually to score rather than Curtis, however busy Curtis was. And so I was a bit surprised that Hurst didn't start the game, but it may have been just the issue of the fact that Portsmouth are playing a couple of games a week at the moment.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, after the goal, which was a lovely finish from Elliot Embleton on his wrong foot, it was half time, and then we came out in the second half and looked really rather comfortable. I think the stats for the game show they had 2 shots on target, and I can't remember either of them being particularly dangerous opportunities. Do you put that down to the performance of Danny Bart and Callum Doyle in particular in having a lot of control at the back and winning? I think I saw a stat where Bart had won 11 out of his 12 aerial challenges, and I think the one he didn't win was they were offside anyway. So do you put it down to just that kind of experience and quality at the back being just a bit too much for a Portsmouth side, as you say, that can't seem to find the back of the net too often at the minute?
I think that's a big part of it. I mean, I was talking about Flanagan earlier, and give Flanagan his due. When he's back in the 3 and doing a defensive job, he does a good job. I mean, I don't think that for me is not the issue with Flanagan at the minute. But Bart is a no-nonsense. I mean, talking about it after the game, gets his head on the ball, clears it, gets his foot on the ball and clears it. I mean, when we say clears it, he clears it properly up into the other half. There's no nonsense. And Doyle just stuck in there, and he didn't. He again was like that terrier-like sort of. And I give Serkin credit there as well, because Serkin doubled up with Doyle, if you like, and together they became a sort of unit, if you like, at the back. So I think you're right. I think there's that element that Bart being in there, Flanagan, Doyle, Serkin, they all and Gooch to a degree. Became a difficult unit to get behind. I mean, you're right. Hoffman didn't have I don't think he had a save to make, did he? And Portsmouth in the second half didn't really get in the Sunderland penalty area until late on. Bit of a worry when they get a set piece late in the game. You think, start to sweat a bit, but thankfully that didn't come to anything. But and then the other side of the coin is, as you say, Portsmouth. Their weakness in the last few weeks has been their inability to score goals, and so a combination of the two. But I mean, Danny Cowley said afterwards he felt, on balance, on play, a draw would have probably been a fair result. And there's a part of me wouldn't disagree with that, because I don't think Portsmouth played poorly yesterday necessarily, and I think you've got to look at their form going into the game as well. 1 defeat in 12, so they're clearly a team that's not easy to beat. So. Sunderland edged it because Hayden Carter, in his sort of naivety and his inexperience, got caught napping at the edge of their penalty area. Well, that's a risk Portsmouth and Danny Cowley are going to have to take at the minute. As Danny Cowley said afterwards, he's a young player learning his game, but at least Sunderland were able to exploit that. And I think that, that for me is another bonus, that they come up against a team who are in form. Okay, they might not be scoring lots of goals, but they are a side that are very difficult to beat, and they kept a clean sheet and beat them. And I go back to something I said a few weeks ago, that I can't see Sunderland losing many games between the turn of the year and the end of the season, because of the way that they're set up now, with Stewart scoring goals. They're looking stronger defensively. There will be an aberration, I said, and of course that aberration we can argue was Lincoln, and that for all sorts of reasons. So. But I mean, in going forward, I mean, each fixture you look at, you think, no, I'm not necessarily worried about them losing the game. It's those sort of odd occasions you find maybe that the opposition do get a goal and dig in and just make life difficult for Sunderland. But on the whole, I think we've still got to be fairly optimistic moving forward. And I think the performance against Portsmouth was indicative of the sort of strength, solidity. And they don't necessarily have to be flamboyant. They can still win games by digging results out, if you like.
One player, I think, who exemplifies Sunderland at the minute, and exemplified that performance, actually, in terms of, he didn't get on the score sheet, he did get an assist, but his work rate, I thought, was absolutely phenomenal in this game, was Ross Stewart. I saw a comment on Twitter earlier suggesting, I don't think we've ever seen a player work, especially a forward, work as hard and run as many metres in a game as Ross Stewart. He's quite something as an athlete, isn't he?
He is, and it belies the fact when we signed him that there was a worry about his hamstring, that he was a bit injury prone, and of course he was injured when he was signed. And thankfully this season he's not been. He's largely escaped sort of injury, and everyone's sort of touching wood and keeping their fingers crossed it stays that way. But you're absolutely right. I think people, we forget how important and pivotal he is defending set pieces.
Yeah.
9 times out of 10 it's Stewart who gets his head on the ball and clears it. He's prepared to drop deep and work very, very hard around the halfway area and then make that sprint to try and provide Sunderland with an outlet. I mean, Danny Cowley said yesterday he is the best forward in League One, and it's hard to dispute that. I think with his goals tally, his work rate, he's a player that's only going to get better. He's certainly, if Sunderland do go up into the Championship, he's certainly, I think, going to thrive in that environment as well. And they clearly have got a player. Now, that is obviously going to be on everyone's radars from other clubs higher up. They will be looking at Stewart, they'll be monitoring Stewart, and the more his sort of the more he impresses and more goals he gets, it's clearly going to be difficult to fight clubs off. But I think, they have got an asset, there's no doubt, and he is unquestionably going to be one of the candidates for player of the season.
Definitely, and I can imagine that when he does eventually get that inevitable call up for the Scottish national team as well, that'll put him even more in the shop window, and if he can do it against other international defences, that again will put hopefully another zero on the end of his price.
Well,
because
I mean he's being monitored weekly by Scotland.
Yeah.
So I mean they're well aware of his ability and the talent he's got.
Obviously, the prospect of at some point Ross Stewart not being there takes us onto the discussion about we're still in January, we're coming into the last kind of week of the transfer window. We're going to be counting down the minutes, I'm sure, to the end of this window, as we were the last. Another striker is probably on Sunderland's top of Sunderland shopping list, would you say? And do you think that we will be bringing in some cover in that position and possibly in the midfield as well in the next few days?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there, striker and midfield. I think that's two areas they are looking at. I mean, Jermain Defoe clearly is on everybody's lips, and Lee Johnson, after the game, did say that they're looking at it. I think we've got to be balanced here in that argument about whether Jermain Defoe would be a good signing. I think you can see it. I can see it from both sides of the coin. And look, there's a huge emotional attachment to Jermain Defoe, and it would be. Yeah. It's quite understandable that if someone like Jermain Defoe came back into the club, it would give everybody a massive lift. But the other side of the coin is, I think, as Lee Johnson said, I think this is more than a decision being made by him. I spoke to one of the ownership group yesterday. They are, I think, minded as well to look at his age, what he could bring to the squad, and also this issue of if Sunderland sign a 39-year-old and they don't go up, is it a pragmatic thing to do when they could be putting that money into probably trying to sign a younger, more athletic striker? There are lots of arguments for and against, and I think they're going to have to look at this very carefully. And I think the other side of the coin is we've got to bear in mind what Jermain Defoe wants as well.
Absolutely.
Now, he's left Rangers quite plainly saying he wants to play football for the next 6 months. There's no guarantee of that at Sunderland by any stretch of the imagination in the way that Sunderland are now set up. I also think, when you look at it, at the size of Jermain Defoe, 39 years old, it's, some of those defences that Sunderland are coming up against, bullying, hard, strong, big, it's not necessarily going to be the case that Jermain Defoe is going to thrive in that sort of environment. So I think there are lots of issues that they will, as Lee Johnson said, there's 1,000,001 things to look at. I feel sorry for him in some respects that he's been singled out as though he is the one making the decision, because he's not. The decision is being made by him, by Christian Speakman, by the ownership. This is not, one person's decision. It's all in the round. And so, and I do also feel that Jermain Defoe himself, if he's looking for playing time, he may be better off at Oxford or Charlton or somewhere closer to home for him in London. So there are a lot of things to consider. And I'd be very disappointed if Jermain Defoe didn't sign, if it turns into a Johnson out campaign, or this is the wrong decision, we would have gone up if we'd signed Jermain Defoe argument, because I don't think that is to me, it's not logical, it's not pragmatic, and it doesn't make a great deal of sense.
Certainly, I think, we need to we do need to look at this in a balanced way, and I think there's been a kind of a lot of hyperbole and a lot of people using this as a potential stick to beat the manager with, when it's, as you say, it's been made really clear right from when Christian Speakman came in that decisions around recruitment will be made by the recruitment team, the sporting director and the head coach in concert. That not one man buying the players that he wants, and then a year down the line they have to rip up the copybook and start again. So certainly whether he fits in with the plan, I think is a big consideration.
We all adore the passion. Look, we all accept that. That's not the issue. I mean, that is why that's Sunderland. You expect that. You expect that. I mean, I think you used the word hyperbole. I think you're absolutely right. I think it became hysterical over this without anybody really being rational and saying, hang on a minute, let's take a step back and look at this in the round and potentially what the benefits are, what the negatives are. And Sunderland there's not a problem here. They're second in the table at the minute, albeit a couple of clubs around them have got games in hand. But I think the results of the weekend prove that Wycombe losing, Wigan struggling to an extent against Gillingham, Rotherham not exactly pulling up trees at the minute. There's a long way to go, and there's not a lot wrong with the squad. They've got, as you said earlier, players coming back. They've gone through a period of a few weeks with a diminished squad and didn't lose a game. They went to difficult places like Wycombe and Accrington, and albeit, yes, they probably should have won at both, but they didn't lose. They're in a good position. Broadhead, I understand, is going to be back in March, a little bit ahead of the schedule that they earlier thought. As you say, they're looking. We would hope to see a striker and a midfielder come in. I understand they're also possibly close to signing Koikoi from, is it Koikoi? Anyway, the left back from Northampton. It could very much be in the frame now. So the squad suddenly is becoming more rounded, if you like, again. So I don't. There's not a lot wrong. So no. I think Jermain Defoe over the transfer window has become a distraction, which has disguised the fact that quietly Sunderland are getting on with the job and actually doing it on the whole pretty well in the circumstances.
No, I have to agree. So looking forward, then we don't have a game midweek. Neither do Wigan or Rotherham. Next weekend.
Well, Wigan have got a Papa John's, but I suspect. So I think it's against Arsenal under 21s. I mean, odds are they're going to field a very changed side. But I mean, bearing in mind when Sunderland played them earlier in the season, they didn't have a lot of strength and depth, Wigan, and I do wonder. I know they've been making inroads in the transfer window. If this schedule that they've got could actually become a bit of a struggle for them in the coming weeks with the number of games they've got to play.
Certainly. I mean, next weekend, next Saturday, all three of the top three are away from home. Sunderland obviously away at Bolton Wanderers, which I think going to take nearly 6,000 fans there, and it's always
the first time Bolton have sold out the away end, isn't it, this season?
Yeah, I mean it's always a good away day as well. I enjoyed, I don't know if I enjoyed the game, but I enjoyed the experience a couple of years ago when I think we drew 1-1 in the last minute and didn't deserve it. And then I think Crewe have got Rotherham, Cheltenham have got Wigan. So we're going to be tacking along with each other, aren't we, for quite a long time while these fixture congestion games get played, and it'll all come out in the wash. But we've seen it in the past. The games in hand are not points on the board, and certainly Sunderland have got to be just keep it on playing our own games, don't we?
Well, you see, I'm a big believer in that now, especially in the experience of the first season that Sunderland were in League One and they got to the trophy final and the playoffs. And we remember how leggy and tired they looked, following the trophy final, and going into the last few games of the season. I mean, if Wigan progress in the trophy, they're in the FA Cup as well. Unlikely probably to get very far, but they're still in it, which means that's another game they have to rearrange. And we're creeping into February, March. And the season ends at the end of April. That's a lot of games to fit in, to keep players fit, to keep them sort of focused. So I think Sunderland probably did make the right decision to play those games over the last few weeks when they could easily have called them off. They didn't have to recall Diamond or Hawks, and they could have easily persevered and said, right, we'll have a break, we'll take a step back. But I think with the way the table is, with Sunderland second again, it's psychologically important as well. I think to be in those top couple of positions. I think they'll be in the top three. Fingers crossed now, touch wood for the rest of the season. And it's applying pressure. It's pressure on Wigan and Rotherham to win the games that they've got in hand.
Definitely. I mean, we've got a week off. I think after the end of the transfer window, we're not playing midweek, where Oxford are away at Wigan, and there's a derby match between Doncaster and Rotherham, and who knows what will happen in those games. And it will turn around. There'll be ups and downs, and I think we'll just have to stick with them throughout that. I just want to thank you for your time this afternoon, Nick, and say to our listeners that we've got plenty of post-match content on the website coming up. We've also got coverage of the women's team as well, with the Lasses podcast live on Twitter Spaces Monday night at 8:30, and me and Ant and Katie will be discussing the game away at Lewis. And yeah, it's going to be a big week for Sunderland in the transfer market, hopefully on the men's and the women's side, but we'll wait and see. So thanks a lot for your time, Nick.
No problem at all. Enjoyed it as ever. Thank you.
Cheers. Ta-ra.